Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Pataf. I'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. December the 8th, a very monumental day for the people of Syria. They, of course, celebrated the anniversary of the overthrow of al-Assad's dynasty, which had a 50-year repressive rule. The country heralded the end of Bashar al-Assad's reign. However, Syria is still left with facing significant challenges to heal following 14 years of civil war. Al-Assad's downfall came as a shock even to the rebels who had unseated them. And of course, this was done by Ahmed al-Sharaa. Joining me now to look to how this unfolded and where we are now in terms of Syria, I'd like to welcome Najah Abdulhalim. She's a PhD candidate and researcher specializing in political economy. She's also a Syrian citizen. Najah, absolute pleasure having you on. Shukran so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Najah, how important was the day, December the 8th, 2024, for many Syrians who had suffered at the hands of Bashar al-Assad?
First of all, I want to congratulate my people. I want to congratulate all of Syrians around the world. And regarding your question, December 8th is a profoundly significant date for Syrians around the world because it marks the beginning of a new political era, of a new era in general, one that finally moves beyond years of repression, of conflict, and institutional decay. For many Syrians, as you mentioned, who lived through the most difficult moments of the past decade, this date represents the moment the country stepped into a phase more focused on accountability, renewal, and rebuilding trust between all citizens and the state. It's the day, I can say, Syrians began to live that a different future is truly, began to believe that a different future is truly possible.
Najah, as we sit right now in the year 2025, what is the current perception of this new Syrian government, given, of course, the 14 years of the civil war? I ask this because it's taken a very long time for people to actually get out of this sort of repressive regime that was of the Ba'ath Party. So where are we now in terms of the new Syrian government?
I think the new government is largely perceived as an opportunity to rebuild the country on foundations completely different from what we had in the past. President al-Sharaa's early statements and policy direction have helped to create a sense that the state is finally prioritizing transparency, institutional reform, and national reconciliation. As you mentioned, after 14 years of war and conflict, Syrians are looking for credible leadership that can restore stability and rebuild the institutions. And many feel that this government is taking its first steps in that same direction.
Najah, economically, Syria went through a very tumultuous period. When we look at the extent of the civil war, 80% of the population still live below the poverty line, and the GDP contracted around 55%. Where are we in terms of rebuilding this? Of course, you've seen a pledge coming from fellow Middle Eastern nations, especially the powerful ones like Qatar and Saudi Arabia. The European Union seems to want to also help in rebuilding Syria. As we speak right now in December 2025, where are we in terms of the rebuilding of the economy, especially given what we have seen with Syria over the last 14 years?
Despite the depth of economic collapse, we acknowledge that there is a deep collapse. Syria is entering a far more hopeful phase. Let's call it. We are fortunate that countries, as you mentioned, such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, have demonstrated genuine commitment to supporting Syria's economic revival. Their investments in infrastructure, energy, and development projects reflect actually a clear desire to see the Syrian economy regain strength and stability. Additionally, the expected lifting of the Caesar Act sanctions in the coming weeks, I think in the next week, will dramatically expand Syria's economic space, allowing for new investments, trade channels, and reconstruction partnerships that were previously restricted. Together, regional support and sanctions relief are creating the conditions for the first real phase of economic rebuilding.
Najah, the unity question, and I guess this has been dominating for the last 1 year. It's going to take quite a long time because Syria is complex. It's not as straightforward as many people would look at it to be. In your view, do you think, or can this new government find a way to create this unity? I want to bring in the Druze community because what we have been seeing is that they've been propped up by Israel to obviously cause a bit of sort of instability within the country. So where are we in terms of that? Can this new government create this unity, but also at the same time find a way to incorporate the Druze community while Israel, of course, has a bit of its hand there?
In my opinion, yes, unity is not only possible, but it's also a central priority for the current government. President al-Shara made this very clear 2 days ago at the Doha Forum when he stated that minorities were among those most harmed under the previous regime. His acknowledgement of their suffering reflects an honest and sincere commitment to ensuring that every Syrian community, including the Druze, of course, receives equal protection and representation in the new governing framework. This message was very important because it signaled a genuine political to heal divisions and the era of exclusion and build a state where justice and equality are guaranteed for all Syrians. The focus now is on rebuilding trust, empowering local communities, and ensuring that no external actor like Israel can exploit internal tensions.
You know what's the irony, and I want to do a follow-up question to that, Najah, is that while the Doha Forum was happening, obviously the revolution occurred at the same time, and I remember watching it on the television screens, and here we are, of course, having Ahmed al-Shara, speaking at the Doha Forum. I mean, that's quite important, isn't it? It's quite a huge moment for Syria, given what we've seen with the sanctions and the civil war that occurred. But his statement of saying that unity is important because they were sidelined during the Bashar al-Assad era. That was an important statement, wasn't it, Najah, given where Syria is right now?
Of course, it was very significant, and it was genuine, and it was a direct message not only for Syrian people, but the international community as well.
And when we look at the way it was spoken, this really shows that Ahmed al-Shara really wants to take this country forward, doesn't he?
Of course, and also he has international support. Like he has the intention to do that, and he's supported by international leaders and international community.
And of course, I just want to, just mention one word before we go to the break, what Ahmed al-Shara had mentioned. We've said frankly that Syria will be a country of stability, and we are not concerned with being a country that exports conflict, including that of Israel. And after the break, I'll continue my conversation with Najah, because we're going to be focusing on Damascus's foreign policy and how important this is going to be going forward, given what we're seeing, of course, in the Middle East. And what we potentially could see from Israel in terms of his expansion and really propping up, especially on the far right of the Israeli government, in terms of what they plan to do for the rest of the Middle East. Do stay tuned. We'll have more for you after this break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Najah Abdulhalim. She's a Syrian citizen, also a PhD candidate and researcher specializing in political economy. Again, shukran so much for staying with us, Najah. Najah, so Ahmed al-Sharaa, of course, was a former senior member of al-Qaeda. And obviously, the West viewed al-Qaeda as this terrorist organization. Of course, every supposed negative assertion that was there for al-Qaeda was given to this group. Are you surprised by the way the world has welcomed al-Sharaa as not only the new leader of Syria, but of course really having physical discussions with him on a way forward for the country?
The international engagement with President al-Sharaa reflects recognition that Syria is entering an entirely new and different chapter. His personal history cannot be separated from the broader context of a conflict where actually many actors underwent major political and ideological transformations. What matters today, in my opinion, is that he's positioning himself and the government towards stability, state building, and reintegration into the international community. The focus now is on how he governs, how he reforms, what he pursues, and the communities he makes, or the commitments he makes to the communities in Syria. This is what's important now.
Najah, let's go to earlier this year. President al-Sharaa meets U.S. President Donald Trump. It's the first time, a statesman from both countries are meeting each other in a very long time. And what we saw was, of course, the U.S. ending its sanctions against Damascus. But also, U.S. President Donald Trump says we can now have new discussions on trade and diplomacy between Washington and Damascus. My question's twofold to you, Najah. Is this welcome, number one, or should this be viewed with cautious optimism, given who we have in Washington right now?
I think the reopening of channels with the United States is a positive development because it alleviates economic pressure on ordinary Syrians and supports reconstruction efforts. At the same time, Syria will pursue relations with Washington through a clear framework that prioritizes sovereignty and national interests. This is very important. Engagement with the U.S. is welcomed, but it must be balanced, transparent, and aligned with the Syria long-term vision for stability and development. So the approach is cautiously optimistic, yet confident.
Yeah, I must say, Najah, here in South Africa, we had our president going to Washington, and Pretoria and Washington right now does not have probably the strongest of ties. The main reason why I mention this is because when you're dealing with, of course, U.S. President Donald Trump, it is, of course, has to be viewed with that cautious optimism. Najah, I want to come to Israel because in the Doha Forum, we heard President al-Sharaa, of course, have a go at Israel, and rightfully so, because what we see, the genocide happening in Gaza. And earlier this year, Israel attacked Syria. We saw that happening in Damascus. Now, we've heard talks that a deal with Syria is quite close, but a lot of the discussions is with regards to the Golan Heights, which Israel occupied during the 1973 war. Where are we in terms of Israel? Because I'm sure there are a lot of Syrians that look at Israel with a lot of caution, and rightfully so.
I believe that the Syrian government remains fully aware of the security challenges posed by Israel's actions in the region in general. The Damascus attack underscored the need to strengthen national defense and reinforce diplomatic channels to prevent future escalations. Unlike the previous era, the government today is approaching these challenges with a focus on responsible statecraft and de-escalation where possible. And protecting Syrian sovereignty without allowing external aggression to derail the country's recovery and reconciliation efforts.
Yeah, Najah, a follow-up question to that. I mean, the Golan Heights, of course, is quite an important... It's important for Syria in so many ways. And I want to read this quote from Ahmed al-Shara. He says the agreement was held on for 50 years. He's talking about the disengagement accord. This happened just after the 1973 war. He said, he asked the question, who will protect that zone? Israel often says they're afraid of coming under attack from southern Syria. So who will be protecting this buffer zone or this demilitarized zone if the Syrian army or the Syrian forces are going to be there? It's quite clear that Ahmed al-Shara is willing to go ahead and have discussions when it comes to Golan Heights. But I think both you and I can agree that when it comes to Israel, there really is a question of how genuine they are going to be, especially when it comes to this.
I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you know what Israel wants?
No, but that's
like
the thing.
Nobody
knows what.
Or know
exactly.
What Israel wants, not only from Syria, but from the region in general. One day they are bombing Gaza, the other day they are bombing Lebanon, and now we are seeing what happens in Lebanon in the past 2 days. So actually, Israelis' actions are never expected, and nobody knows what do they want.
No, I agree with you on that, Najah, because they violated the Gaza ceasefire. I mean, 2 weeks ago, or a few weeks ago, what we saw, of course, was U.S. President Donald Trump with Mohammed bin Salman. And Saudi Arabia has been quite clear. You know, they want a two-state solution. Donald Trump got upset, if we are to read the reports. And Israel does not care about the two-state solution. So I do agree with you. It's going to be a very difficult time for Syria right now, because when we look at Israel, you've put it there. Nobody knows what Israel wants. And I think the concern is for the Syrian citizens, because if the Damascus attack is anything to go by, there should be really a cautious approach to Israel. And I'm sure that's how the Syrians feel right now. Isn't that the case, Najah?
Of course it is, but at the same time, actually, I'm surprised by the amount of patience the government is showing toward Israel, and they call it, I'm quoting, strategic patience. So we hope the best, and I think people they don't have a lot of options, but they do trust their government, and we hope the best. But again, Israel's actions are never expected.
Yeah, no, I couldn't disagree with you there. Najah, one final question. In your view, what is Syria's approach in terms of foreign policy going forward? I think he's yet to, of course, make contact with our government here in South Africa, with President Cyril Ramaphosa. But is Syria now going to be quite a major player, not just within the Middle East, but, of course, discussions going forward in terms of foreign policy?
I think the foreign policy now is shifting toward a more balanced and pragmatic approach, and of course, sovereignty-centered diplomacy. The government nowadays aims to rebuild strategic relations with regional powers, expand their economic partnerships, and re-establish Syria as a constructive actor in the international system. The priority now is to move forward to secure national stability, to attract more investments, to facilitate reconstruction, and to ensure that the Syrian decision-making remains fully independent. This foreign policy reflects a new era, in my opinion, one focused on rebuilding a respected and stable and unified Syrian state, hopefully.
Najah, absolute pleasure having you, and shukran so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Najah Abdulhalim, a PhD candidate, researcher specializing in political economy. She's also a Syrian citizen, breaking down the 1 year since that Syrian revolution. After the break, we come back home. We're going to be continuing the conversation with the murder of Marius van der Merwe and questions coming with regards to witness protection and protection of whistleblowers. I'll be speaking to the South African branch of Amnesty International with Genevieve Quintal after the break. Do stay tuned.